They fired me the same morning I brought donuts to celebrate my 30th work anniversary. Name's Tom Bell, 58 floor manager, loyal to a fault. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap tile cleaner, and my old employee badge was still warm in my hand. Ever been blindsided by someone who thought you were too small to matter? They said the guest room was full, but that wasn't the part that stung, it was how easily they said it. I hadn't expected a red carpet, of course. Lorraine had always been the type to run her home like a schedule board at the Amtrak station every hour, penciled in every dish planned down to the parsley garnish. But when Carl chuckled and said, "Looks like the sofa bed's your chariot tonight, Eli," something inside me quietly bent. Not broke, just bent the way old garden hoses coil when left too long in the sun. The living room smelled of pine and cinnamon, too perfect, almost artificial. I placed the pecan pie on the marble counter and took off my gloves. Sadie helped Lorraine with the cider, her movements practiced polite. She glanced at me once quickly and offered a tight smile. It wasn't pity. No, it was worse, it was understanding. And it stayed with me longer than it should have. The sofa bed was already made, neatly tucked cream-colored sheets, a woolen throw, and one pillow that seemed borrowed from the guest bed, just not the bed itself. I noticed the embroidered H on the throw stitched in faded navy. Harwood. My last name. Or at least it used to be the name that hung on the deed to this very house before Marianne passed and Lorraine took over the arrangements. That blanket was a relic of a time when I belonged here. Hotels full up for the week, Lorraine added over her shoulder. Holidays and all, can't even get a cot. Her tone was light casual, like she was talking about a bad weather forecast. I nodded. I always nod. Dinner was fine. Fine in the way silent films are fine. Everyone gestures, everyone smiles, and no one says anything that matters. Carl carved the ham with his usual precision, like a man auditioning for a cooking show that no one would watch. Sadie kept her eyes mostly on her plate. I sipped the too-sweet cider and stared at the empty chair at the end of the table. Marianne's old seat. Lorraine had filled it with a poinsettia. Later, after the laughter of board games I wasn't invited to had faded into upstairs murmurs and closed doors, I lay on the sofa bed listening to it groan under every breath. The springs were loose, they sighed like tired knees. I turned onto my side, then onto my back. Nothing helped. My hip ached where the metal bar pressed through the mattress, and my right hand found the edge of the embroidered blanket. I rubbed the H between my fingers. It felt warm, faintly. Sadie tiptoed downstairs once around midnight. She stood by the kitchen pouring herself water and noticed me awake. "You okay?" she whispered. "I'm fine," I lied. She hesitated, then nodded. That same tight smile, understanding again. I wanted to ask her to sit with me just for a minute, just to remind myself I still mattered in some space, but I didn't. She padded back upstairs. I didn't sleep much. Around 5:30 a.m., I folded the blanket neatly and sat upright, rubbing my lower back. It protested with a dull stiffness. I gathered my coat, slipped on my shoes, and tiptoed out to the driveway. Ice crunched underfoot. The sky was still that bluish charcoal, not yet ready to admit the sun. Sadie came out 10 minutes later, coat half-zipped, eyes tired. "We're going?" she asked. I nodded. "Hotel's got a room open now. Room 214 at the Mason. They called at dawn." She didn't question it. She knew better. We loaded her small overnight bag into the trunk. Mine had never left it. As I slid into the driver's seat and reached for my gloves, I opened the glove box and paused. There it was, faint and familiar, the old key fob tagged Mason 214. The first room I ever cleaned at the hotel when it opened back in '97. Marianne used to tease me about how proud I was of that key, as if it were the master key to a palace. I ran my thumb along its edge and tucked it into my coat pocket. Something about holding it again made my breath slow. The engine hummed. Sadie settled into the passenger seat, her head against the window. As I backed out of the driveway, the porch lights flickered, then steadied. No one stood at the windows. Lorraine was likely still asleep, or maybe just didn't care. We drove in silence past houses strung with lights and inflatable Santas. I wondered how many of those windows held stories like mine of people once central, now peripheral. of names once carved into mailboxes now forgotten in guest lists. But I had the key. Not just to room 214. To something older, something I had once lost the grip on, but perhaps just perhaps could hold again. I swiped the card. The door beeped green. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Room 214 hadn't changed much. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and old radiator heat. A garland of pine cones hung above the elevator button, likely Rosa's doing. She always added a quiet touch of care no one asked for. Sadie stepped in first, suitcase wheels thumping across the threshold. "Warm," she murmured, setting the bag down beside the dresser. The lamp in the corner flickered on with a soft click. Amber light spread across the room like an embrace. I followed slower, dragging my feet on purpose. The rug was still the same slate blue with faint beige trim. I had picked it in 2003 during a supplier overstock sale. There were better rugs, sure, but none that reminded me of dusk on the Shenandoah like this one did. Rosa said it looked like the Blue Ridge Mountains under snow. Rosa. She was there at the front desk this morning, framed by poinsettias, and an old Dell monitor, smiling without needing an explanation. "Room 214, sir," she'd said as I walked in. Her voice low and certain. "Still yours." No raised eyebrows, no hesitation. Just the quiet dignity of someone who remembered. Sadie had smiled at her, a little surprised. I didn't explain. Some truths explain themselves with time. Now I sank into the armchair by the window, letting the upholstery creak around me. The radiator hissed and clanked in the corner like it always had. I glanced toward the desk. There it was, the same ceramic mug I'd bought from that craft fair in Roanoke, white with deep green vines curling around the lip. My initials were etched near the handle, EH, faint now, but still there. Sadie peeled her coat off and sat on the edge of the bed. "You used to live here?" she asked. "Managed it," I corrected. "Built it, really." She nodded, eyes scanning the room like a visitor in an old church. "Feels different." "It feels like someone cared," I said, and meant it. I opened my laptop on the desk. The Wi-Fi connected automatically, no sign-in page, no prompt. It recognized me. That felt strange and good. My email inbox loaded slowly. The first message was from Carl, titled Family Planning Discussion, Deck 28. I clicked it. To the others, it began. "Let's finalize Dad's assisted living options and the estate division now that the holidays are winding down. I know Eli's been sensitive about this, but we can't keep stalling." I stared at the words. There was no "Hi Eli," no "Dear all," just the others. I scrolled through. No CC with my name, no BCC, just a list of Lorraine, Carl, Henry, and Monica's siblings' in-laws. My name absent, like I'd never had a seat at that table. I closed the laptop slowly, let the room breathe for me. Sadie hadn't asked to read it, but she watched my face. I felt her hand settle on mine, not a grip, just presence. Warmth without pressure. That small, silent act said more than any apology I'd ever received from Lorraine. She whispered, "Let's just stay here, Dad. Feels more like home." I didn't answer, couldn't. I stared out the window where fat flakes of snow began to drift past the glass, as if the world outside had slowed just for this moment. Later, I unpacked quietly. A few shirts, socks, razor, nothing much. But as I lifted the blanket from the suitcase's inner lining, I saw the Harwood towel, still folded from the night before. No wrinkle, no smudge. Lorraine hadn't even noticed it was missing. Or maybe she had and said nothing. It lay diagonally across the top of the bag now, like it had chosen its place. I reached out and ran a finger along the H. The stitching was clean, precise. My mother had done it herself for our wedding gift, 40 years ago. I remembered her hands, always cold, always sure. I folded it again, this time with care, and placed it at the bottom of the closet drawer. Some names fade. Some you carry, even when others forget. I was driving through a foggy road lined with pine trees, not really sure where I was going until I saw the weathered tin sign, Magnolia Diner. No GPS, no plan. My foot just knew when to brake. The old place still stood there, stubborn and plain, a relic untouched by the kind of change I never managed to keep up with. I pushed the door open. The smell of fried grease and burnt coffee gripped me like an old friend. Pulled me back to a time before Lorraine, before Carl, before family meetings stopped including my name. Didn't expect you'd still order the black coffee, no sugar, came a voice deep and familiar from the far booth. I turned. Rufus Mallory sat there, shoulders a bit more hunched, but hands still thick and steady. A steaming cup sat in front of him. Another one, mine, already poured. No questions, no surprise. Just a mentor waiting for a student who finally came home like 5 years hadn't passed at all. I slid into the booth without a word. Maggie, the diner's owner, brought over 2 slices of toast, edges burnt just right. Call it nostalgia, not poor technique, she joked before disappearing into the kitchen. Rufus let me take a sip first. Let the bitterness wake something I dulled too long. No lectures, just quiet presence. That was his way. Harwood way, he said slowly, like brushing dust off a door long shut. Remember that your little plaque used to hang in every room. Serve with quiet dignity. Leave people better than you found them. Now they've got minibar pricing cards. I nodded. I remembered those plaques. I engraved them by hand. Nailed them up with brass tacks. Now replaced by laminated price lists, bold fonts, double-sided tape. Still yours, you know, Rufus added. That principle, no one stole it. You just walked away. I didn't know what to say. Sadie was still asleep back in room 214, and here I was 30 minutes from the hotel, sitting in a booth that smelled like 2003. He took another sip, then spoke again. There's this group of kids just got laid off from a regional chain. Sharp, quick, but no one ever taught them how to serve with self-respect. They asked me, how do we not just do the job but understand why it matters? I didn't have an answer, but I remembered Harwood Garden. My heart thudded. Harwood Garden, the community project I once dreamed of. A training ground for hospitality, a gathering space for neighbors. Abandoned when I walked away. Maybe it's time, Rufus said. No pressure, just a seed dropped on dry ground. I ran my finger along the rim of my cup, found a familiar chip in the porcelain, like muscle memory, like proof that parts of me still lived here. Time for what I asked, voice barely louder than the drizzle tapping the window. Time to stop being a ghost in your own legacy, he said. Just then the front door swung open. A gust of wind carried in a yellowed slip of paper that landed at my feet. Rufus picked it up, unfolded it gently, and laid it in front of me. A coffee-stained receipt, my handwriting in blue ink. For the day we remember who we are. I knew that note. It was from Harwood Inn's opening day. The day I brewed the first cup, served the first plate, wiped the first bead of sweat from my brow with that embroidered H towel. Rufus didn't say another word. He slipped his wallet back into his coat, stood up, and left the receipt behind. I'll see you at the garden, he said. I stayed there, my palm resting on my old handwriting. Outside, the sky stayed gray-white, the snow still falling. But this time, I didn't feel cold. She didn't mean to ruin it. But when Sadie handed me the torn towel, something inside me gave way. Not in a loud, angry snap, but in the way a tree might crack quietly under the snow, unnoticed until it leans. It was early morning, December 30th. Glenville was still asleep beneath a thin veil of snow, and the second floor of the garden west was quieter than usual. The hum of the laundry room at the far end of the hallway was the only sound besides the soft tread of Sadie's boots. I followed her down the corridor carrying 2 mugs of hotel-grade coffee. She pushed the door open with her shoulder. Inside, warm steam curled around us, mixing with the smell of lavender detergent and tired machinery. Rosa sat perched on a stool in the corner, knitting something peach-colored with the calm of someone who had seen decades pass through linen and thread. Sadie had promised to do her share of laundry before her friend's New Year hike. She fished out a small pile of clothes from the communal dryer and placed them on the folding table. I sipped my coffee and leaned against the metal shelf. Dad, I used this one to wipe my boots yesterday, she said, holding up the monogrammed towel. She looked a little sheepish, like a child caught drawing on the walls. It was the Harwood towel, the same one I'd pulled out from my overnight bag days earlier. Its embroidered H now hung by a single thread, loose and half-curled like a sentence someone had started but never finished. Oh, I said simply. Sadie winced. I didn't realize. It was important. I took the towel gently from her hands, folding it slowly, smoothing the corners. tucking the thread back in with my thumb. "It's just a towel," I said. But it wasn't. We both knew it. In the corner, Rosa watched but said nothing. Her knitting needles tapped softly. The silence was heavier than the scent of detergent. I looked up at the small rectangular window. Snow tapped against it like someone politely asking to be let in. Sadie went back to folding shirts. I stayed still, staring at the towel. In its frayed corner, I saw years. I had tried hard not to revisit days spent obsessing over guest checklists, training new staff, refining the Harwood way like it was scripture. And then the slow unraveling after Lorraine and Carl shifted their weight into the boardroom, and my name quietly slipped off the masthead. I pulled out my phone, new email, subject line, property redistribution, draft agenda, from Lorraine. It was dated yesterday. My name wasn't on the recipient list. Again, Sadie peeked over my shoulder, reading the subject line. "You're not going to that, are you?" she asked, folding a pair of socks with practiced care. I took a moment before answering. "Not yet." She nodded once and didn't press further. In the hallway outside, I heard a vacuum start up, distant and mechanical. I took the towel and slid it into my coat pocket, the soft fabric still warm from the dryer. As we stepped out of the laundry room, Rosa's voice followed us gently. "Some threads are meant to be pulled, Mr. Eli. Others stitched back in by hand." Sadie looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Old wisdom," I whispered, patting my coat pocket. I didn't tell her I'd already found the sewing kit in the nightstand drawer. Tiny scissors, white thread, needles sealed in a plastic sleeve like it had been waiting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was the one who paid for the ballroom. Clover Hall was dressed in winter whites, and muted gold garlands wound tightly along the columns like someone had tried too hard to make it festive. The kind of effort that didn't come from joy, but obligation. Outside, the drizzle kept a rhythm on the arched glass skylight. I could hear it echo in the silence between chairs. I had noticed the reservation a few days ago, C. Whitaker Family Gathering, catering for 20 audio setup. The name was vague enough for anyone else to miss, but I knew that handwriting. I knew that habit of abbreviating names to avoid confrontation. It didn't take long for me to confirm. Ben hadn't looked me in the eye when I'd asked about availability for a small corporate event that day. "Oh, I think that date's been blocked off," he muttered. Private indeed. When I stepped into the hall, I wasn't dressed for confrontation. My coat was damp, and I still smelled faintly of the lavender cleaner Rosa preferred. I saw Sadie first. She looked like she'd just come in from the garden hair, a little wet scarf crooked around her neck. She didn't smile when she saw me, but she didn't look away either. Lorraine was standing near the front, gesturing with a confidence I remembered from Thanksgiving speeches and PTA meetings. She wore navy and pearls, her voice low but decisive. Carl hovered beside her, nodding along. A few cousins I barely recognized sat in folding chairs around a table dressed with one of our better linens, the kind we save for VIP guests. The pattern caught my eye, small laurel sprigs with the Harwood H stitched faintly into the border. My initials, my fabric. And so Lorraine was saying the Montauk property will be split 3 ways. We'll have a deed lawyer finalize the paperwork by March. No mention of me. And the Garden West. She continued, remains a shared business asset, though we all agree it's time to move toward an external management model. Sadie shifted in her seat. "Has anyone asked Eli what he wants?" Lorraine waved a dismissive hand. "He's always been too sentimental for this." That was when I stepped fully into view. The room fell quiet, like someone had unplugged the speakers mid-song. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked forward slowly and set my laptop down on the center table. Rain clung to the edges of my jacket, dripping softly onto the carpet. No one moved. No one offered me a seat. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed pale blue, then white. I clicked open the email, Lorraine's message to Ben, dated 2 weeks ago. "Keep him out of it. He won't know. He never checks the vendor ledger." I turned the screen to face them. There it was, no theatrics, no raised voices, just pixels on a screen. Just the truth. No one spoke. I closed the laptop quietly. "Let's talk outside," I said. Then I turned and walked toward the French doors, the ones that opened out to the courtyard, where years ago I'd planted the first rows of lavender, hoping they'd return each spring. The doors creaked as I pushed them open. Cold air wrapped around me, damp and honest. I stepped onto the stone path, the faint outlines of lavender bushes poking through the frost. They hadn't bloomed in months, but I knew where each one should be, like I'd memorized their positions even blindfolded. Behind me, the room remained still. Then footsteps, one set, Sadie. She didn't say anything right away, just stood beside me, pulling her coat tighter. "You didn't have to come," she said finally. I shrugged. Didn't have to plant these either, but I did. Her breath showed in short clouds. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I said. "But I'm not going to stand inside a room that pretends I never existed." She nodded, eyes fixed on the edge of the garden. "You still have the towel?" I reached into my pocket and handed it to her. The hardwood towel, the frayed stitch still undone. She turned it over in her hands. "Maybe I can fix it." I looked at her, my daughter caught between two halves of a family split along silent lines. "You don't have to," I said. "But maybe I want to." A window creaked behind us. Someone watching, maybe Lorraine, maybe no one. I let my hand brush the top of the lavender bush, brittle and dry. Even dormant things deserve to be remembered. The drizzle turned heavier, ticking on my shoulders. I let it. This hotel had been my life once. Not just bricks and linens, but a promise that strangers could arrive and feel even briefly like they mattered. Inside, they were rewriting that promise without me. Outside, I was beginning to write something new. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I had seen enough to begin again on my own terms. Sadie slipped the towel into her coat pocket. "Let's not go back in." "We won't." We stood in silence a little longer, the rain making steady music on the stone path. Then we turned, walking together toward the staff door, past the kitchen I designed, past the sign I'd carved with my own hands, leaving the ballroom, the lies, and the old version of myself behind. Later that night, I sat by the window in room 214, the same window I'd washed every Thursday back when we opened. The view hadn't changed much: Elk Hill's crooked lamppost, the blinking red sign of Tilly's Bakery, the frost lines curling like spider webs across the glass. I held a notebook Rosa had left on the dresser, blank except for a single line in the corner: "Whatever you plant, you water." I started writing, not a complaint, not a letter to Lorraine, just fragments. The smell of cinnamon rolls in 008. The time Rufus sang off key during orientation. The first time Sadie set foot in the hotel lobby, holding my hand wide-eyed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Some people inherit homes, others inherit names. Me, I'd inherited silence. But that night I started talking back. Not everything was built to last, but some things were built so others could. That thought stayed with me as I stepped into the oldest corner of the hotel, the storage wing. Rosa had given me the key earlier, pressing it into my palm like it was something sacred. The air was different here, no scent of linens or polished tile, just the quiet breath of forgotten wood and stories that had nowhere else to go. The fireplace hadn't been lit in years, but it still bore the soot lines from winter nights long gone. Beside it, the old oak mail cubby leaned slightly, its brass labels dulled with time. My fingers brushed the lowest row, and there it was. To Mr. E. Harwood, urgent. The handwriting was clean, formal, the envelope yellowed, sealed. I didn't open it right away, just stared. I remembered the day I built that slot with Rufus. "You'll need a space where good news finds you," he'd said. At the time, I'd laughed. But he wasn't joking. Inside the envelope, a folded letter from Harwood and Finch, dated 2008. A legal offer to transfer name ownership permanently. Lorraine must have signed the counter letter, but they sent this to me. The next item Rosa brought in was even more damning: an envelope she'd kept in a drawer all these years, addressed in Lorraine's unmistakable loops. In it, a single page, a thank you. It read like confession. "Eli, thank you for putting up the funds. I couldn't have held the bank off any longer. I won't forget what you've done for us." It was dated February 2012, the month I quietly emptied my personal savings. I sat down on an overturned crate. My back ached. My chest too. Sadie knelt beside me. She'd read both letters, said nothing for a while. "Then why didn't you fight for your name back?" I wanted to laugh, but there was no humor in me, because sometimes I said peace costs silence. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. She held up the towel, the hardwood towel she'd re-sewn last night. The thread was tighter now, still visible but proud. "I think we're done being quiet," she said. She stood and crossed the room, placed something on the front desk, the desk where I used to check in guests wearing my name on the badge. It was a fresh envelope. "To the board, reinstate the Harwood name." Her hand trembled only slightly as she let it go. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. "Rufus," I answered. His voice, gravelly as ever, came through with a crackle. "I've got 5 kids just finished their hospitality degrees. They're looking for an internship. Justice Fund graduates. Thought you might have a corner of that old hotel for them." I looked at the desk, at the towel, at the fading plaque on the wall. Then I looked at Sadie. She smiled through misty eyes. "Tell them I said into the phone we've been expecting them." She left it by the window, washed, folded, mended. The H was back in place. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun spills in sideways, catching on frost-lined windows and the breath of old buildings. I found the towel on the windowsill of room 214, exactly where I'd watched snowfall melt a week before. Sadie must have placed it there while I slept. I picked it up, gently ran my fingers over the embroidery. Someone had sewn the thread back in tighter than before, but with a visible knot. Not perfect, honest. Downstairs, Garden West hummed with the cautious energy of beginnings. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon oil and old pine, a scent I'd long associated with Sunday morning scrubbing and nervous guests. Rosa was checking the schedule at the front desk. Her glasses sat halfway down her nose. "They're early," she said, nodding toward the main doors. 5 young people stood outside, wrapped in mismatched scarves and layered jackets. Each of them held a folder or a small suitcase. One had a portfolio with Hospitality Justice Fund written in black marker across the front. They looked like they weren't sure if they were in the right place. "They are," I said, already moving toward the door. I let them in with a smile and led them past the fireplace into the hallway where Harwood Lounge used to host wedding rehearsals and baby showers. It hadn't been used in years. Dust clung to the edges of the carpet, but the lights worked fine, and someone, probably Rosa, had chalked a welcome message on the whiteboard. "Orientation, Garden West Cohort." Beneath it, "Smaller built, by Eli H." I blinked. Sadie stepped beside me. She handed me the key to the lounge. "Thought they'd rather hear from you." The group took seats at the long wooden table. I saw my name on their folders printed neatly above training materials. One of them, a tall young man with bright eyes, raised his hand. "Are you Mr. Harwood?" I paused. "Some people still call me that." Rosa chuckled softly from the doorway. That afternoon we walked through the basics: how to fold linen corners, how to balance a tray without spilling. They asked good questions, took notes. One of them offered to fix the broken hinge on the old storage cabinet. Another asked if she could try rewriting the guest handbook in plain English. By the time Lorraine arrived, we'd already finished the day's agenda. She stood just inside the threshold, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her coat was too thin for the January wind. I noticed her eyes settle on the whiteboard, first on my name, then drift toward the circle of chairs, the chatter, the genuine movement in the room. Sadie noticed her too, but neither of us said anything. Lorraine lingered, lips parted as if forming a question. Then she turned and left. Later, while checking emails, I opened a message from Rufus. The subject line read, "They remember." Attached was a spreadsheet with more than $12,000 in contributions. Small gifts from former guests, old co-workers, even someone I'd once trained for a night shift back in 2007. The note read, "For the next generation of hands that care." I walked out to the lobby. Rosa looked up. "It's time," I said. She nodded once, then turned back to the front desk. I stepped through the front doors into the cold, past the planters we'd filled with lavender back when Sadie was still in grade school. At the main entrance, I pulled a small nail from my coat pocket, the same way someone might retrieve a relic. Then carefully I hung the Harwood towel above the door. It fluttered slightly in the wind, just enough to catch the light. That evening I found myself pacing the now empty lounge, listening to the echoes of laughter and learning. I imagined the room as it once was filled with nervous newlyweds children, slipping under banquet tables, the clink of glass, and soft music bouncing off the ceiling. It felt different now, not a place of memories, but of momentum. Sadie joined me carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You didn't answer him," she said. "Who, the kid who asked if you were Mr. Harwood?" I shrugged. Didn't feel like the answer mattered. She looked at me, patient but firm. "It does. To them. Maybe to you too." I stared at the floorboards, tracing the cracks I once tried to fix with carpenter's glue and weekend hope. "I guess I'm getting used to being seen again." Sadie nodded. "You never stopped being visible, Dad. Just quiet." We sipped in silence. Then I heard a gentle knock on the side panel, Ben, the morning manager, holding a padded envelope. "Came for you," he said, handing it over. Inside was an old Polaroid. Me, Rosa, and Rufus, all in front of the Garden West on opening day. In the photo, I was holding Sadie, maybe 4 or 5 years old, wearing a staff pin too big for her jacket. Tucked behind it, a handwritten card. "Legacy is built, not by ownership, but by presence. Don't let them tell you otherwise. R." I didn't recognize the handwriting. That night, I walked the halls one last time before locking up. Room 214's door was cracked slightly, the Harwood towel now folded on the desk inside. I touched it again, not out of doubt, but because we touched the things that tether us. The hem felt warm, as if it had just been stitched. Some things don't return broken, they return transformed. I closed the door and headed toward morning. In the days that followed, guests began arriving again, old-timers, new travelers, families with heavy coats and hopeful smiles. They noticed the towel, some asked about it, others simply nodded like they understood. And every time someone signed the guest book, they saw the words printed below Harwood Hospitality, "Welcome home." This time, no one erased it. They wrote my name beside the date, and under it the word home. The dining room of room 214 was filled with the scent of warm burgers and fresh rosemary fries. The graduates from our first hospitality class sat around folding tables, their laughter echoing gently against the old wallpaper. Someone had brought a speaker playing soft jazz. Rosa, true to form, disapproved silently, but didn't stop it. Sadie had insisted we hold the celebration here, the room where it all began, she said, tapping the doorway like it held a blessing. Each of the 5 young interns took turns telling a story. Not about classes or textbooks, but about people, the guest who cried at check-in and left with a smile. The elderly couple who tipped with baked cookies. Hospitality in its simplest form. When it was Sadie's turn, she stood with both hands around her mug. "My dad once slept on a sofa," she began, voice steady, because his own family had no room. "Tonight he gave 5 strangers a place to call home. That's who he is." Silence, then applause. I felt my ears go hot, my hand suddenly too large for the mug I was holding. Near the end, a young couple walked in, travelers passing through. They paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. "You're the Harwood guy, right?" the man asked. "The one who patched the towel?" I smiled. "Nah, I just work here." They laughed, took a seat. Later, Sadie quietly reached for the leather-bound guest book on the check-in counter. Her pen moved slow but sure. Sadie Harwood, Jan 2023. We finally came home. I didn't say a word. Just poured one last cup of coffee and sat in the armchair by the front window. My chair now. The patched towel, newly laundered, rested beside me on the armrest. And outside, the snow had started to fall again, quiet, steady, like a benediction. The patched towel hung gently on the doorframe, catching the afternoon light like a small flag that had weathered its storm. I could still smell cinnamon from the cookies the interns baked, sweet, clumsy, hopeful. Turns out you don't need everyone to remember your name, just the right ones to carry it forward. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding with steadier hands and a softer heart. Have you ever found your way back through something or someone you thought you'd lost? Feel free to share your story below or hit subscribe if you'd like more tales like this.